Namaste. We are confronted with two problems today. Palm Sunday and Passion Sunday. Which, up until this year, I thought it was problematic that they're smushed together here. But now I'm thinking maybe it's not problematic that they're smushed together, and maybe it's even helpful that they're smushed together because it takes away sort of an opportunity for clergy who are fans of especially maudlin Good Friday services to allow old ladies who don't blot their lipstick to slobber on the feet of life-size crucifixes. But if you're into that, that's okay. So let's pretend that this is Jerusalem, around here. Now, so Jerusalem, the city, is about 1 square mile within the walls. So if we're going to play Jerusalem in Milwaukee, and we want to do it here, let's say that we're going to build a wall. And we're going to build a wall out there, like where 794 is. That'll be our western wall. What's that?
The Mexicans would pay for it.
The Mexicans will pay for it. Although in biblical times they wouldn't be here. So, but we have to have people here in order to make this analogy work. Then we're going to build the north end of the wall, probably, let's just say, at Lincoln Avenue. And then we'll build the south end of the wall at Howard. And some places, because the lake kind of drifts out, we might have to make little adjustments. And we're going to need a water supply, so we'll have access to the lake, but Jerusalem didn't have a lake shore, so we'll have to build a wall over there. And now, into this wall, we're going to cut 5 or 6 holes where people can come in and out. How, and then this here, this Marian Center, is going to be Herod's palace. Because it's got a lot of rooms. We can house our soldiers here because we're occupying the city. And so they can stay here, a nice parking lot for the horses, you know, we could use the convent back there as a stable, or the assisted living, or the senior housing as a stable. There's garages, there's plenty of land for the horses to graze. How hard would it be if there's only 5 or 6 ways to get into our little Jerusalem here, and we have a Marian Center full of soldiers to keep track of who comes and goes? Not very. We could send, say, a dozen centurions to each gate. And they could tell us who's coming and who's going. Now suppose that somebody has a little parade at one of the gates, saying that this dude coming in the parade is their king. How fast do you suppose our centurions would arrest that guy and bring him over here to the palace? Yeah, just like that. So, in all probability, Palm Sunday is one of those stories that John Dominic Crossan meme that was going around Facebook was talking about that I butchered a couple weeks ago, which said that the problem, I'm going to butcher it again if I try and say it, but that the problem basically is that biblical peoples wrote metaphorical stories, and we're so dumb that we interpret them literally.
Well,
Palm Sunday is a story about who they finally understood Jesus was after they went through Holy Week and Easter. And what they understood all of that stuff meant, his going to Jerusalem for that last week, after it was over. But it only made sense to put it in front of it because it was the beginning of this climactic thing. It wouldn't have made any sense to have the triumphant entrance after he was resurrected. You know, that's the ultimate anticlimax. It's like a movie that just doesn't get the plot right. But on the other hand, you have to know that if there's only a few ways into a city, it's not like, I mean, you could have a quickie parade coming into today's Milwaukee anywhere you wanted and nobody would notice if you did it quickly enough. So this would have been seen as an act of sedition. It would have been seen as an attempt to overthrow the government. And there would have been no way that it wouldn't have been noticed. Even though there were tons of people headed to Jerusalem at that point. In fact, the fact that there were tons of people headed to Jerusalem would have had the security forces of the city on high alert. It's sort of like going to Jerusalem now when Ramadan is starting, which I had the pleasure of doing. It's like, if you've ever wondered what it's like to be a sardine, absent the oil, mustard, or tomato sauce, go in to the old city when Ramadan is starting. I mean, you're literally, it makes Summerfest on the 3rd of July look like a vacant lot. I mean, it's just, and there are soldiers with weapons on the rooftops. I mean, it was for me one of the more intimidating scenarios.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
And
wow.
especially when you're trying to go this way and everybody else is going this way. It's like, I said, now I know what it's like to be a salmon, except I don't think I'm going to spawn. So then we get to the whole passion thing. And we have to be careful because we've been misinterpreted throughout history. This story has been loaded with anti-Semitism and prejudice because what we haven't understood is that going back to, this is our Jerusalem here, if the occupation of Israel didn't end with the crucifixion of Jesus. The occupation of Israel carried on and in fact only intensified 40 years later when the Jewish people got the bad idea that they could revolt and gain freedom, and they were crushed by the Romans once and for all. But even in the aftermath of that, as the Christians now are evolving out of this and trying to show themselves as a separate religious tradition, about the worst thing they could have done for themselves, well, there are two worst things they could have done. The first, it was illegal to start a new religion. So you didn't want to say, we're not like those Jewish folks, because that would be starting a new religion and they would have been suppressed. Second thing you didn't want to do is say, those Romans are really bad people. And so the only way to really do both at once was to say, those Romans crucified Jesus. So the nuanced thing to do would be, on the one hand, to say that yes, you come out of Judaism, but if you had to blame somebody for the death of Jesus, you were better off to blame the Jewish people than the Roman people. The problem was, legally, the Jewish people had no authority to crucify Jesus. The Romans were running the show. That's why the Jewish people kept, in the story, bringing Jesus to the Romans. The Jewish people had no authority to do capital punishment. And so, this, however, is where, before we had the ability to, and the archaeological discoveries, to go back and look at the culture of the time, people became convinced that the Jewish people killed Jesus. This is where the Palm Sunday story gets helpful, because these were Jewish people seeing Jesus as an opportunity to achieve some kind of freedom from oppression. So it wouldn't make any sense at all to kill somebody who you saw as your opportunity to find freedom. And you see, not just here, but in other places in the Gospels, a certain amount of sucking up to the Romans. And Pilate, who is actually, history shows, not a nice man. I'm always reminded of, I think it was Babu Bhatt in Seinfeld, who kept saying, "You're not a nice man, Jerry Seinfeld." You know, if he was there, he would go, "You're not a nice man," punches Pilate. You know? And yet, boy, Luke especially is a master, cover your butt. And he does it through this story too. And it's parodied very well. Sometimes I think the best Lent or Easter sermon would be watching Monty Python's Life of Brian,
Oh,
you know,
totally.
with Louise Boabis, you know, Louise Wadowicz, you know, where Pontius has a speech impediment. Yeah, you don't know. And the other thing, I guess, that I like about pushing this together, it doesn't stop that, are these dramatical performances in churches sometimes where they build the big 4x4, they take 4x4s and build the big cross, and then they find the littlest guy they can find and throw it on his back and make him carry it in during the procession. Near the end of my run as an Episcopalian, we had two priests. It was not an old one and a young one, it wasn't the exorcist, but it was this rather large, corpulent person who was he was easily over 6 feet tall and big. And this guy who was like probably 5'7" and 130 pounds dripping wet. So, and the big guy was the rector, he was in charge. So he sent somebody out to get some 4x4s from the lumberyard, and rough ones, you know, so that they had like big splinters and stuff coming out of them. Stain them up, make a big cross that was like 8 feet tall. And guess who gets to carry it down the aisle but Tiny Tim, you know? And it was so big, he couldn't carry it. So they had to put little wheels.
That makes it work though.
And when they were like,
They call them siren wheels.
I guess, he couldn't even, I mean, the poor guy, I'm not really laughing at him as much as the egomaniac who had him do that. And up front, there were like a couple steps up. He couldn't even drag it up the steps. They had to have Simon come out. There's a value in ritual and in reenacting things, but you can just kind of go over the edge with it. You know, there were a couple of years that they were around doing that, and I kept thinking, you know, if he falls down, he could really get hurt. Is this the point of this? I mean, is this what Jesus would want? And you know, ultimately that's the question. What leads Jesus to the cross? It's not like, for me anyway, that Jesus said, this will be fun. It's not, you know, I mean, hey, let's have a parade.
He had his doubts, I guess,
Yeah.
Gethsemane.
Yeah. And I don't think, for me, if he knew everything was going to be all right, then it's play acting. And yet some people are very offended by that notion, that he didn't know everything was going to be all right. And some people's faith said he absolutely had to know everything was going to be all right. I don't think somebody who knows with absolute certainty everything's going to be fine is agonized. I don't think someone who knows with absolute certainty everything's going to be all right is making a sacrifice of any sort whatsoever. I don't think the example that's set is to just remain within your comfort level and do what you need to do as long as you know everything's going to be all right. I think the example that's set is that somehow love has to win. That there are times and places and spaces that we have to extend ourselves way beyond our comfort zone. I've been trying to watch, but thanks to Hulu, trying as best I can do, this movie about Father Michael Judge, who was a fire department chaplain in 9/11 and was killed. And there's always that, you know, even locally, what is it that makes somebody run towards things that most people run away from? I even think about, you know, traffic accidents. There was just a story, someone on 19th Street somewhere, I don't know why I remember it's 19th Street. But there was a car accident. They were in their home. They heard the crash. A mother and her two teenage sons. Teenage sons ran out into the street. One of the cars was on fire. And the one woman was, the woman in the car, not on fire. Couldn't get out of her car. So the son went in and sat next to her and held her hand. And told her just to stay with me. The other son, and I think the mother, went and got the woman whose car was on fire out of the car. And the mother said that she always stressed to her boys, you just have to do the right thing. When the moment comes, you just do the right thing. And I did not see the picture or the story, but from what I was told, these guys looked pretty rough. Like if they were coming at you in the dark, at dusk, you would turn around and go the other way. Which is an interesting story about perceptions and prejudice, but also about going towards something that most people would run away from. And I think I don't want to turn these guys into Christs, but they might be. But that's the message. You know, the message isn't about all of this drama. The message isn't about we need to manipulate our emotions so that we're sobbing on Good Friday and happy, happy, happy come Easter morning when the lights flip on. But it's about these concrete little steps in each of our lives, and this not being necessarily heroic, but just trying to do a little better each day, and trying to do the little things. They don't have to be dramatic things like burning cars, but just do the little things that make a difference. And I think in a culture that does that, the large things take care of themselves. Amen.